All right, who would have guessed that I play an IT specialist on television? So I'm not a scholar, and obviously I'm not an IT guy either, and I was a bit intimidated to do this talk because there's all these smart people with titles after their names and they go to universities and stuff like that. And I'm just like this IT dude from Denver. So it was kind of intimidating to be a little bit transparent on that to start with. So this isn't based on any kind of real empirical research or deep thought. I'm a person that thinks shallow and wide. And so, inch deep and a mile wide. And so I'm going to throw a bunch of ideas out there and you can mull through them at your leisure and see if any of them apply to your life or practice or spiritual techniques in any way. So let's see if I can do this. Oh, I know why. There's this new thing called the power switch. Yeah, how many technical people does it take to run a slideshow? It's bigger than a bread box. Okay, so I'm not going to read the slides to you, but I like that the word transparency also contains the word command in it. And so there's a certain amount of you think of transparency as being a receptive thing, but maybe it's also a way of projecting or sort of impelling or imposing in a way that isn't immediately transparent. So when you are transparent, you're giving birth to a crosswise kind of thing maybe when you break the words up. And you expose yourself and you don't have any choice but to look within. And this process of introspection and exposure is going to create feedback loops that will inspire and even force adaptation at an accelerated rate. So as soon as you start looking outside, you start looking inside and you project that interior, exterior, which then creates external feedback loops and makes you kind of transform quickly, maybe. So it's different from invisibility. Magic is full of invisibility, and that's where you look through something. And in transparency, you're looking inside of something, so only part of it's transparent. And there's, by definition, pieces of opacity there. And so there's things that are being concealed in the very process of revealing, which makes it kind of interesting. And transparent surfaces generally are fragile, they're delicate, they shatter, they break, they crack, they scratch. And if they're not optically sound, they distort. So transparency is used to make things look bigger, to make them look smaller, to make them look crooked. And mirrors are transparent in a way. So they can even multiply an image with a lens. Like soap bubbles, they can reflect, refract, and they even pop when you try to touch them. So the transparency is both seen and not seen, touched and not tangible in a way, and fragile. What happens when transparency breaks? So now, let's see if we can we're obsessed with, I'm not going to read this word salad to you, it's an eye chart, but we talk about transparency all the time, but I would argue that most of these things that we call transparency really aren't, that they're a way of showing what we want to show, and they're kind of maybe even a form of marketing. So transparency, unlike deception, relies on trust to build a solid foundation. But what we do with that trust and where we put that trust can kind of go back to a sleight of hand motion where you're showing a thing with your hand while you're doing something with the other hand, or you're putting focus on your face when you're actually doing things with your hands, perhaps. So now, there's a disingenuous thing. I've discovered this wonderful word that I had to put up there. I don't really know why, but I just love appaltering. And it probably Kabbalistically is interesting because it's changing, an altar, and lots of different fun puns and words with it. So there was this guy named Hayamoet Storm who wrote in a book called Seven Arrows that the first people would put everything that they were and wanted to be, their hopes and dreams and fears and aspirations, onto a shield so that everybody that they encountered would see who they were and would be put on notice that they had looked at it before they had shown it, and therefore these weaknesses might be turned to strengths and could easily be parried using the shield in a sense. But it's an interesting dichotomy because these shields are transparent and yet they're also used to defend. And so this very transparency is actually a rigid surface that's being used to deflect attacks in a way that seems interesting. So they're forcing themselves to change, and you're putting people on notice that they're going to have to try something new on you. So interestingly enough, Storm also wrote about the medicine wheel, which is essentially an elemental model. It doesn't align one-to-one, but I think transparency aligns to introspection, which he called the West, which was represented by the bear because they hibernate and think a lot, supposedly. I've never seen a bear think, so I don't know. So Hayamoetz himself has come under a lot of scrutiny because his books don't align with First People teaching at all. There's no indigenous group that taught anything like what he teaches. So he's been called a plastic shaman, a charlatan, mimicking the true spiritual teachings of our great continent of the US. So this is one of the 4 forms of camouflage. And so he's posing as a shaman. I'm not going to claim that he is or is not. That's not the point. But it is mimicking somehow. So mimicry is adaptive. It's trying to fit in, trying to conform, uniforms, virtue signaling. There's 4 kinds of camouflage. Is that the next slide? Okay. So there's 4 kinds of camouflage. There's adaptive, which is where you try to fit in, where you try to fit into your environment. There's disruptive, where you go and you clash with the environment and break up known patterns. There's mimicry and there's disguise. And there's 4 of them. And we were just talking about the medicine wheel. I don't know if they'd line up or not, but it might be kind of fun to try and see what kind of mental attitude those go with. So we talk a lot about, did anybody else think about what they were going to wear today? And that's how you present yourself, and that's a form of disguise in a way, is that are we doing adaptive disguise, or are you doing disruptive disguise? This one's disruptive, I'll give you a hint. Yesterday was adaptive with the Crowley shirt. Maybe. Here, but probably not on the street. So camouflage requires an understanding of your environment because no camouflage works in any place. So with mimicry, what I wanted to say was that we do a lot of mimicry in magic too, and and propose that God forms and mantras and yantras and mudras and the actual regalia that we wear for magic is maybe us presenting ourselves to deities and metahumans in a way that they expect or that's familiar to them, or that makes them feel more familiar to us by speaking their language in a sense. So everything's context. I don't know why I put that in. Oh, yes, I do. Dazzle paint, my favorite thing in the whole world. It's not actually camouflage. What it does is it breaks it up so that you can't recognize range and eyeball something as well. And so using this kind of camouflage, I mean, we all use dazzle paint every now and then in our workings. And I did throw a Custania quote in there. So basically, you have to disrupt the routines. So I did get it. I told somebody I didn't, but I did. So concealing coloration, so that's blending in. That's the wallflower and of trying to look like the thing you're trying to be in. And then disguise itself is more of a mask thing where you're trying to pretend to be something that's familiar to other things. It's not an action thing, it's where you actually change your form. And I wonder if spells aren't a form of camouflage in a way, where a love spell, you're disguising yourselves as the person that he wants. And in a, you make yourself look like the person that wins the lottery, or make yourself look like the person that gets that job. And so maybe spells are a form of shape-shifting. And it's the most mundane is physical shape-shifting in a way. If you think of it, it's a lot easier to change the way you look than it is to change the way you are. So it's context-specific. And no form of camouflage is effective against all backgrounds. I love this North Korean fail. It requires an understanding of the environment you're entering. You don't want to use adaptive when disruptive is the clutch theory there. It's an inversion of reflection is required to achieve transparency, and I don't know what that means. I just copied it down from someplace. So then we've got physical, and that's the easiest one. Then we've got social, psycho-emotional, like how do you present to others? Politicians presenting as straight or LGBTQ friendly, or as family people, or as, great patriots or something like that, or, us, getting a mohawk to go to a show, or, wearing a Hello Kitty t-shirt to a Magic conference. But so it can be a marketing strategy, but it's inherently inauthentic. Like all forms of camouflage are disingenuous and yet extremely useful. So we use camouflage as a way of protecting information from the profane. But I ask why we still need to do that. Does knowing how the pyramids were built or how the persistence of memory was painted make us able, give us the resources or the skills, talents to actually do it? And what's the harm if I build another pyramid? I'm just asking for a friend. But so in practice, mimicry is a solid magical technique, I think, like I said earlier. And you have to be adaptive. Is a cloak of invisibility camouflage or transparency, I ask you? So while camouflage breaks up contours, steganography breaks up content. It conceals true meaning, which is the image or the information payload with a seemingly unrelated cover. So I can flip the bits inside of that picture of trees to make it have a cat picture in there too. It's not very well, it doesn't have great resolution. Or I can flip the bits in that little barcode to make it say that, I hate Ronald Reagan or something. So the funny thing is some of you know this, I didn't before I started researching this, but the term steganography was first used in an occult treatise about cryptography. And it was disguised as an alchemical book about how to, I have to read this, steganographia, the sure art of disclosing one's mind to those who are absent, which is just the best subtitle ever. So it was published sometime, it was written in the 1500s and published in the 1600s, and then promptly put on taken off the nihil obstat list and banned and not rehabilitated until the 1900s. But it's generally recognized as the first Western book on crypto anyway. And Dee and other people heavily use steganography in their work. But there's steganography everywhere if you think about it. Like what's concealed within the image of a tarot card, for instance, and what's hidden in the Bible or whatever. People are always finding codes. Shakespeare, allegorical fables and things like that are used to conceal information from people that don't have the key. Without the key, you can't translate it. So stego, in a way, is a form of camouflage. So now we're going back one step, back to camouflage. It's a really good technique for hiding the fact that something contains a message. People are always suspicious of encoded things, and it's a puzzle and a challenge, and it invokes curiosity. Whereas steganography hides it in plain sight and makes it, camouflages it as an innocuous image that inspires people to put something else in there. Yet the message is transparent to everyone who possesses the key, which brings us all the way around. So obviously this is a modest proposal, and I hope it gave you some ideas to apply to your practice and your daily life and your relationships and what you decide to wear when you go out for dinner tonight. And I really want to thank, none of them are here at the moment, but Kevin and Elizabeth and all of you have been wonderful. I've really enjoyed this. I've felt really welcome. This really feels like family and home to come here, and I've had conversations with a lot of you. And you don't know everything about me, and I don't know everything about you because we weren't fully transparent. You don't know what my kids' grades were in school. Some of you don't even know I had kids. So, but anyway, hopefully you can use Maya and apply it to your work a little bit more and create some illusion that's constructive and acts as a wedge to improve who you are and where you are. And that's it. I forgot all about using cut-ups to defeat stego.
Awesome. So questions for Tom?
Chirp, chirp.
Hi, Tom. Can you give an occult, take from your perspective on our current actual political situation regarding cybersecurity? Can you just give like from your perspective, as someone who knows what you're talking about, and as someone who has some occult, kind of all this practice stuff going on, can you take those occult lenses and look at our actual cybersecurity situation and give some perspective?
Oh, dear me. Well, to be completely transparent, well, I think a lot of it's a bunch of hooey, personally. And I think, like, there's some bad things and dangerous things happening, and there's nefarious things, and a lot of it's being blown up out of proportion in a way for people to sell products and make money and build portfolios and, you know, put more people on their bench to, you know, it's a way of commandeering resources. But also, I mean, and a lot of the people don't have the level of skill that they claim to. A lot of people are just script kiddies running scripts and, you know, or pickpockets. Like, there were some really good pickpockets back in the day. And, you know, where are they now? They're all in Russia hacking, you know, doing ransomware. So from that, but I mean, I think so circles and protection and I mean, all of the sort of the tools of traditional witchcraft and occultism, ceremonial magic in particular, sort of the Masonic tradition, I think is the old-fashioned way of defending networks, of creating firewalls. You draw your circle and you have, you know, you have your incantations, which are your scans and your you know, your daily practices, updating your virus signatures and your and running your code, you know, doing your exercises, your breathing and whatever. So there's that part. But things are moving towards this zero trust model, which is kind of more of a chaos magical kind of model where you're opening yourself up and there aren't banishings, you're establishing things based on trust. I don't know. Is that what you were asking? I mean, but I mean, people are tearing down their firewalls. So I really do think it's going more towards like a quantum chaos kind of idea like paradigm where you assume zero trust, or no allies, and therefore you deal with everything equally, but with equal suspicion as well. And so you never really open up that inner thing until you've gotten the right handshake, you know. But I'll argue that, you know, punks and magicians have always been really good at that. You can smell a poser a mile away. You know, I mean, and the same thing with magicians. I mean, you can tell people that are part of your tradition. You can tell, you know, without like a bunch of formalities, you can generally tell if people know what they're talking about. And so, I mean, I think that's what kind of zero trust is more kind of like the way that undergrounds have always worked, the way that, you know, crime syndicates and magicians and, you know, deviants of various sorts, you know, real or imagined, that they know. I mean, you can tell the hanky code, you know, you put the right hanky in your computer and it'll get into the club. Yes, sir.
I'm very taken by the statement in your write-up which says that when we appear obvious, we're innocuous. And the mark never believes you when you tell you exactly what you're going to do. When I was at Cambridge, I decided I wanted to create a happening that was a ritual happening. So I was inspired a bit by Crowley's description of a dramatic ritual. And so I was very open to everyone. I mean, strangers answer my advertisement and got together and about a dozen of them. And I was very open. I explained, you know, this is really an artistic experiment, and you know, we're just trying something. And for instance, you will all turn your gowns around in black and black hoods, not for any dramatic reason, but simply so you won't be self-conscious, you won't feel being watched, and so on and so forth. I explained it. And then we held the ritual, which was grand, you know, drama. Someone I met afterwards said, you know, that was incredibly powerful, because you've given us all this open, you know, I explain everything, you understand it all. He said, when we were in the dark with our hoods on, starting to do it, I thought, oh my God, is there something else behind this? And everyone else did. He said the atmosphere was electric because of that. You know, they didn't believe my transparency. And, it was powerful.
Well, that was originally, so I put in the abstract, and then I had this really clear idea of what I was going to say, and then months passed, and by the time I got accepted and started working on it, the sort of my thinking had either evolved or been forgotten. But one of the things I was originally going to base this on was that Genesis P-Orridge did an essay on transparency about exactly that, where if you tell people exactly what you're doing, they either think you're full of crap, or they think that you're hiding something, that's not really what you're going to try to do, or they're just like, oh, that's boring. You know, oh, all they're doing is like sacrificing babies and drinking their blood. Ah, I saw that on TV last week. It's boring. You know, so.
Yeah, the conjurer. I'm placing your card in the middle of the deck, and I'm going to shuffle it. It's covering something up.
Right, but then I couldn't find the essay, so I didn't use it. I had it someplace and couldn't find it, and I wanted to base it on that. So I wound up not using it for this at all. Oh my! Look at the time. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. You don't want me to burst into an interpretive dance.
Wait, we don't?
Maybe you do.
I guess just out of curiosity, you know, steganography works because the cover image or the host file basically is using some kind of lossy compression.
Right.
Because of the lossiness of that compression, you're able to embed other information. And I'm wondering, when you were talking about it, that connected to wires, just like that idea of like the signal being not pure or, you know, disrupted in some way. It's through that disruption that you actually camouflage this other thing. It's not a question, just
No, but it's interesting because I think that depending on how deep the image is, right? Like even if it's even if I've played around with it a little bit, because what I discovered is that you can put, if you put, you know, binary ASCII, if you look at a file, if you look at a picture file, sorry, I'm gonna geek out a little bit, but if you take a picture file and you put it in a text editor as binary or as hex, and you start pasting like word patterns in there, like in, you know, ASCII characters as binary into the image. Generally speaking, it just shows up as noise on the image, and what you can do then is you can just run it through spell checker. Like the person on the other end can run it through spell checker, and most of the picture noise won't translate, won't be aligned properly to be detected as text, and you can just pull stuff out that way. In a way, it's like this, you know, I call it ghetto stego. I just made that up. I don't call it that really. Sounds good. But so yeah, but I don't think it matters that much. Like if the image is of sufficient resolution, I don't think the lossiness helps if you're doing, like if you were embedding a picture in. But if you were embedding a simpler message or a smaller resolution picture, I think you could sneak around that, just because it's just, I mean, you're just changing one pixel, or, you know, 10 adjacent pixels if you put, you know, I mean, you put a few words in there, or, you know.
Yeah, but it's still disrupted, right? Like that image is still disrupted.
Oh, it's totally, yeah.
The chart is created.
Yeah.
They just open in the hex editor.
Right, or you put noise in it, whatever, yeah.
So, but you're still, like, you know, you're getting this image that comes out that's got lines.
Yeah, adding salt, yeah. And that's what throws people off. I mean, that's what actually, like, you know, so if we go back to the slide, this is like the Crowley lecture, right? This is the forbidden slide. But so, I mean, when you talk about how to defeat stego, it's all about pattern matching and pattern disruption and slicing the picture in different ways. So you can cut the surface, or you can expose the interior, and you can cut up the top of it, you know, cut up the cover and see, like, if any patterns emerge from it, like really similar to cut up in a way. So, yeah. I don't know if that's helpful. That's my last one, and that's my that's a steganographic business card there. Oh my! Look at the time now.
Yeah.
I still have 3 minutes.
We could probably do one
More question. Come on.
Maybe just a comment.
The transparent intelligence on the tree of life is the path of Zion, which is the lover's card. And the lover's card is the card of making a choice. And there's a choice between two. And one of the things about the lover's card is you choose one, but the other one that you don't choose remains there in the unconscious and remains there in the story. And I think there's something in that. I'm not entirely sure what it is. But it will reveal itself later. And I don't mean the answer will reveal itself later. I mean the unconscious choice that isn't made does reveal itself later on in your life when you make one choice and not the other. Does that make sense, what I just said? I don't think it does it?
Makes sense to me.